Hi Nintendo, I'm Untamed Fox. You may remember me from such video game analyses as Hyperbolic yet Realistic, The World of Ori, or Hollow Knight, A Catharsis of Melancholy. Or you may not know me at all, but the things I do, to quote Troy McClure. Anyway, this month I'm analysing Breath of the Wild. It's a decent work which took me, as for each of my videos, a few hundred hours to play, analyse, write, translate, record and edit. Obviously, it uses footage from the gameplay and cutscenes, as well as music from the soundtrack, and since I'm analysing Breath of the Wild's cutscenes and soundtrack, there is a lot in this video. And I'll be frank, I'm afraid you will take down this video, even for such a small channel as mine is. Don't do this. It's a fairly in-depth look at your video game, and I believe I have the right to use footage and music in this context. I'm not showing anything from the artbook that I have bought, by the way. So, be nice. Please. Thank you. Also, I'm only analysing Breath of the Wild. In this video, I don't make any connections to other games from the franchise, because I don't know them enough to do this, and such a video would require much more time. I was able to look at both the French and English scripts, but not the Japanese one, since I can't understand Japanese unfortunately, so there might be some things that differ depending on the translation. I've notably added a few words about this in the pinned comment. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you'll enjoy. And now for the actual video. I don't know much about the Zelda universe. What a start. Before I played Link's Awakening and Breath of the Wild on the Switch, my only Zelda memory was the 1989 Game & Watch, where I saw Link dodging skeletons while beeping, and occasionally the Triforce would fill up. I never played it, I was watching my siblings doing it. Nothing very exciting. I did love Super Mario Land 2 though. My return to video games came rather late, around 2019-2020, and I wanted to explore this franchise I knew nothing about, except the name of the princess and the playable character. That's a start. But for that I needed a Nintendo console, so the Switch belatedly made its way onto my desk with, after a few months, Link's Awakening, which I thought was cute, and especially Breath of the Wild, whose open-world aspect and artistic elements I had already seen really made me want to play it. I wanted to discover who Link was, so I'm asking you, who are you? You won't answer, because we know you don't talk. Don't worry, I'll find out your secret because art speaks for you. Well, let's be honest, you're not much. You're almost nothing actually, but let's analyze what this nothing really is and how it really works. Link and Zelda are not completely fixed heroes. Of course, Link is the playable character in all the games of the franchise, and Zelda appears in almost all the opuses, except Link's Awakening, in which it is Marin who helps Link in his quests. We could even mention Ganon, who often gets to say hello. However, Link and Zelda are not always the same from one game to another. There are several Links and several Zeldas. This, coupled with their roles, Link is a knight, Zelda most of the time a princess, reinforces their archetypal character, especially since they both possess heroic qualities. Link seems to be the brave knight with exceptional fighting skills, even when he looks like he's 6-year-old, Zelda the princess with powerful powers. However, looking, before playing, at other elements in Breath of the Wild, Link's Awakening, and especially Skyward Sword, another reality appeared, concerning Link in particular. He was not necessarily introduced by the game as this perfect knight whose value was recognized by almost all the NPCs, even the impossible Revali. In Breath of the Wild, it's even stronger, as Link seems torn between what he does, which is undoubtedly heroic, and this strange feeling that the game wants to knock him off this heroic pedestal, making him an anti-hero almost comical. The fabulous artistic elements and the player are not strangers to this. As I mentioned earlier, while Zelda and Link are almost always present in the games of the franchise, they are not the same and their relationship is not the same. At least its starting point is not necessarily the same. I found this one very interesting and shown with virtuosity in the cutscenes. Zelda and Link's lost memories triggered when you reach specific places whose photographs are kept in the Sheikah Slate. Those scenes took place 100 years before the game. Let's briefly recall the story of Breath of the Wild. 100 years before the beginning of the game, the power of Calamity Ganon seems to awaken, threatening Hyrule and its inhabitants. 5 champions are then appointed. Daruk, a strong Goron with the power of the shield. Mipha from the Zora domain with a healing ability. Revali, the arrogant Rito able to generate a powerful updraft in order to soar into the air. Urbosa from the Gerudo clan, manipulating Lightning as she wishes. And of course, Link. The first 4 champions, Daruk, Mipha, Revali and Urbosa, are each asked to pilot a divine beast, a huge mechanical animal capable of weakening Ganon by firing a powerful laser beam at him. These creatures had been built about 10,000 years ago during a previous confrontation with Ganon. He's a particularly tough calamity, but they had been buried after that as the king was afraid of the beast's power. Thousands of years later, though, it was decided to excavate them to use them against him. When the time comes to confront Ganon, however, nothing goes as planned. As he was aware of the divine beast's power, he sent Blight Ganons to corrupt the mechanical creatures. Hyrule is now devastated, the 4 champions have succumbed. Link is seriously injured, leaving Zelda almost alone. The swordsman is taken to the Shrine of Resurrection, where he will stay for 100 years in order to heal from his wounds. He is finally awakened by the voice of Zelda, who enjoins him to take the Sheikah Slate, leave the shrine, and save the kingdom. Here we are in the Great Plateau. The knight, Amnesiac, meets an old man with a fluffy beard and an intriguing paraglide necessary to move around the world. He gives it to us in exchange for 4 emblems, the rewards of the shrines. There are 120 shrines in Hyrule and its surrounding areas, but the 4 emblems from the first shrines on the Great Plateau will be enough. In each shrine of the Great Plateau, we acquire a rune, an ability used via the Sheikah Slate. Magnetis, 2 remote bombs, Stasis, and Cryonis. Once the 4 runes are added to the slate and the 4 emblems obtained, Grandpa reveals his true identity, tells what happened 100 years ago since Link has forgotten everything, finally gives the paraglide to Link, and off we go. Technically, you can go and fight Ganon right away and finish the game, but it's better to explore Hyrule to gain some stamina and health, and especially to reactivate the 4 divine beasts, which will each take away 1/8 of Ganon's HP. It's welcome. But technically, we can go and face the calamity wearing our underwear right now. That's the idea. But what about Zelda? I voluntarily left her aside because she's the one I'm going to start the analysis of Breath of the Wild with. In Breath of the Wild, well, 100 years before, I guess, Zelda, before facing Calamity Ganon, or even during the previous confrontation, has not revealed the power of the seal. She desperately tries to trigger it, and in the meantime studies the relics to find a way to help the champions counter Ganon. Facing her, Link embodies success, an almost too easy success symbolized in particular by his sword. He is her age and is capable of much more than her, even though she's the Princess of Hyrule. This success is the result of daily training in addition to his natural talent, but Zelda does not immediately understand this, even though they have both put in as much work as each other. She studies relentlessly. But she fails. Even her attempts to unlock the secret of the relics do not succeed, at least not right away. Thus, the shrines she discovers do not open even though she has the Sheikah Slate. Only the Chosen One, Link, can open them. It is then that, faced with the danger that the rise in power of Calamity Ganon represents why the princess must travel throughout the kingdom, Link is appointed as Zelda's personal knight. She's not very happy about this. She doesn't even call him by his first name. "My father is assigning him as my appointed knight," she writes in her diary. What Link thinks, you'd think we wouldn't know since he doesn't speak, but some delicate details tell us a bit more about the knight. A first important element in these cutscenes are the looks. Breath of the Wild's graphic style, with its cel shading and its very particular light effects, the light effect on the character's hair or in the water for instance, almost completely erases Link's mouth, highlighting his huge eyes whose expression finally changes little, but it still does sometimes. In addition to that, the relative position of the two characters will underline the asymmetry of their relationship, an asymmetry that will progressively fade until the two characters feel at the same level. During the first cutscene, Zelda seems to bless Link and his sword, as he is her newly appointed personal knight. Everything in this scene is artificial. Zelda is standing in front of Link, who's kneeling as a sign of respect, his face lower to the ground and his eyes closed, again as a sign of respect. But the princess considers herself incompetent. She feels inferior to Link, and the position she has here, this apparent superiority, which is only due to her rank, her birth, and therefore one might say to luck, she doesn't think she deserves this superiority, coupled with the oath she pronounces, doesn't correspond to how she feels towards the young man. Moreover, she has to look at him and his sword while Link's eyes are closed. Yet Urbosa, during the ceremony, explains that looking at Link brings her back to her lack of power, to the fact that she is not up to the task for herself, for her father, and, according to him, for those who live in the castle. So this is a very difficult moment for her, while Link's token of respect doesn't seem to work either, not from Link's point of view, who, we'll see later, is extremely dedicated to his task, he definitely respects her, but from Zelda's point of view. One can even imagine that she can stand this mark of respect, the fact that he is head down and eyes closed, all the less as he will not speak afterwards either. While he steps aside out of respect, she thinks he is stepping aside out of contempt. Why would he kneel before a princess who does not have the sealing power? Why would he bow his head and close his eyes to receive her blessing? Everything feels wrong, and so does Zelda's voice. She recites her text very flatly and sighs heavily before or after specific words, like when she says, Hylia.
Reçois la bénédiction de la déesse Hylia.
And have proven yourself worthy of the blessings of the goddess Hylia.
In the French dubbing, remarkable voice acting by Adeline Chetaille, as always, we feel more the pain of the young girl, while the English dubbing, by Patricia Somerset, gives her a more monotonous voice. Both choices are easily justified.
Whether skyward bound, adrift in time, or steeped in the glowing embers of twilight, the sacred blade is forever bound to the soul of the hero. We pray for your protection, and we hope that the two of you will grow stronger together as one.
À travers les contrées célestes, par-delà les limbes du temps et les ténèbres du crépuscule, l'âme du héros et l'épée de la destinée ne font qu'un. En ce jour et pour toujours, que nos prières galvanisent sa lame et soutiennent ton bras.
Her speech is in two parts with a similar ending, as if she had paid little attention to it. Zelda's hand makes the same opening gesture to bless Link as when her power is finally unlocked, but here there's nothing. Moreover, she lowers her arm before even finishing her sentence, looks at this hand that delivers nothing. There is this last look from Zelda's point of view when she gazes one last time at Link, his eyes still closed even though Zelda's prayer is over. He is seen in a rather warm light, his peaceful face framed by his hair floating gently in the wind. It is a very beautiful shot, and Zelda's eyes do not stay angry for long as she finally lowers them. Perhaps she is ashamed of how she feels about Link's apparently pure soul. We can read in her diary that she is not talking about her own contempt for him, but rather about the contempt she thinks Link feels towards her. The focus itself is slightly asymmetrical in the sense that while Zelda is at one point very blurry, when Urbosa says, well, at least that's how the princess sees him, Link is never that blurry. Finally, in this scene, there are only a few seconds of music at the very end. Essentially, in the piano's high register, there are, however, some notes in the medium register that come as if to disrupt the theme, the main theme of the game. And if you listen with headphones, you can hear that these notes, in particular, are more pronounced in one ear. They are heard rather in the left ear, to show that they are not completely integrated into the theme. Listen to the third note, the E, louder, and the last two, the F and the B flat. They come from elsewhere. As a symbol of these two characters who have to live together in spite of it all, especially for Zelda. There is an intrusion, as Link is a bit of an intruder for Zelda at the beginning, and the register is different, it's lower, to imply the asymmetry between the two characters. After this strange ceremony, the looks are different, which is partly related to Link's function. He must follow the princess and not precede her. So there is a new asymmetry in their looks. While Zelda was looking at Link, who had his eyes closed, a first asymmetry, now it is Link who is looking at Zelda while she's walking in front of him, and therefore often looks in front of her, even while talking to him, at least at the beginning. And Link does indeed look at Zelda permanently. He has his eyes riveted to the princess, especially since he blinks very little. One could say that he follows to the letter the advice he was very likely given not to take his eyes off the princess. He also follows the princess' pace, always walking at her pace. Their steps are sometimes almost synchronized. He never puts himself forward, and if Zelda stops, he does the same. In fact, he is like a shadow, which is probably confusing for Zelda, who, despite her difficulty to bear Link's presence, sees him rather in the light as a symbol of success. Not seeing Link's gaze on her, a gaze without an ounce of contempt, and not being able to access his thoughts, she can only imagine the worst, since he doesn't speak, at least not at the beginning. Later he confides in her, but it's only a piece of information recorded in Zelda's diary. We don't witness it. Again, as in the first cutscene, their respective positions are not symmetrical either. As Link is always behind Zelda, the perspective gives them a different size, and in Zelda's case, when she asks about Link's sword, the princess appears much smaller than the knight, whose sword is then emphasized as he carries it behind his back. She barely turns towards him. When she talks about her research, she is shown from the front, thus taller than Link. When she talks about his sword, symbol of Link's success and amplifying her sense of failure, she is seen from the back, much smaller than Link. The rhythm of her speech also changes a lot.
From here, we'll make our way to Goron City. Then, we'll need some adjustments on that divine beast so Daruk can manage it as easily as possible.
When she talks about the things she masters, her work on the relics, Hyrule's flora, she is very lively and rhythmic, almost smiling. She uses the future tense, assuming the certainty of her success, but this does not last long. As soon as she says, "I'll make it," in French,
J'y arriverai, il le faut.
she stops and goes silent. As soon as it is more personal, her silences increase. Link's attitude could be only related to his function, to the king's orders. However, we can note that he behaves in the same way with Mipha. In the associated cutscene, he also often looks at Mipha in this entire way, his gaze sometimes changing direction very briefly when she mentions Ganon in particular. But often the game reminds us of this intense look of the hero. Some shots are subjective from Link's point of view, and during these shots the heads are almost always seen from the front, translating Link's intense gaze. On the contrary, Zelda hardly turns around when she talks to him, and only anger makes her look at him almost in the eye when Link's presence becomes too heavy. Almost in the eye because she manages to avoid his gaze, rolling her eyes, closing her eyes, and keeping her distance from the hero. Passing by him, she finally barely looks at him. In the cutscene with Urbosa, the asymmetry is still there, since Zelda is asleep when Link comes near her. This interesting treatment of the looks changes when Link saves Zelda from 3 Yigas who were about to kill her. Then again, Zelda running while doing little windmills with your arms is not very efficient, aerodynamically speaking. By the way, I would have preferred to be shown a Zelda who runs normally and knows how to defend herself but is just facing too many enemies, but I guess it would have had less impact. It is then she who looks at him directly, turning to him. It's a look full of emotion, of admiration towards the one who doesn't hesitate for a second to save her. We can notice that he doesn't seem to have any animosity towards her, even though she chased him away a little while before. No harshness ever shows on his face, and apart from this scene, if one of the characters makes us understand that Link has a reaction stronger than usual, this reaction is never shown to us. When Urbosa or Daruk ask him if his relations with the princess are improving, or when Reveille shows blatant contempt for him, in the French version at least he implies that Link is angry, we do not see Link's face, it's the interlocutor's words that imply his reaction. This scene is the only one in which Link takes action. He asks to see Urbosa after understanding Zelda's ploy to escape his surveillance, as the Gerudo city is forbidden to men. But this is only recorded in Urbosa's diary, as are all the elements associated with Link's words. We do not witness it directly. But the asymmetry is still there, since Link, focused on his mission, doesn't look at Zelda. She's on the ground in a weak position, and Link standing in a particular posture, protecting Zelda while showing himself ready to attack. The shot is very beautiful. We see all the characters, even the knee of the unconscious Yiga. A very charismatic knee. When Link appears, his theme is heard in a very soft way in the piano's high register. And here I really became aware that it was his theme, whereas I usually associate the overworld theme with the general notion of adventure. I mean, this theme is for me the theme of the adventure, translating this promise of an adventure that the game offers us, rather than Link's theme, Link being an almost empty character. Here it is clearly Link's leitmotif, accepted by Zelda. It is after this scene that Zelda finally calls Link by his first name in her diary, whereas before it was only a pronoun, proof also that the princess isn't much surrounded and that Link is her only connection. She doesn't see her father every day, thus he occupies a large part of her thoughts. Even in the music, Zelda named Link. It's also after this scene that the two heroes will then start to look at each other and get on the same level. The princess now looks at the knight in a very intense way. As for Link, however, nothing has changed. He has always looked at Zelda like this, only she has changed. There is no anger when Zelda looks at Link and she shares her knowledge of the world of Hyrule, from herbs to hot-footed frogs. Even a seasoned Link doesn't eat raw frogs, Zelda, that's the basics. In one memory, she even uses very surprising words when talking about the confidence she has in her mount. It seems she's talking about Link. She says benefit of the doubt in English, or in French, when you put yourself in someone else's place, it really changes everything. However, the sealing power has still not been awakened, and Zelda still sees herself as inferior to Link. She still looks away in the cutscene when they shelter from the rain. This one has a symbolic aspect through the presence of the two statues that painter Picongo compares to a couple, husband and wife, in a tender gesture. However, it's no matter of tenderness here, even if Zelda may be seeking some kind of comfort. We can see how her opinion about Link has changed as she praises his work and dexterity as a swordsman. Link is considered the greatest swordsman in the kingdom, as we can guess in the memory Daruk's song, although Link's first name is not mentioned, Daruk being interrupted. Unable to bear the sight of his sword at the beginning of the adventure, she now smiles as she watches him train, but feels decidedly inferior to the young Hylian. This feeling culminates in the low-angle shot where Link appears 3 times as tall as Zelda, the two characters separated by the sword made gigantic by the camera angle and parallel to the straight line that connects their heads. It's a beautiful shot graphically, but really terrible, which showed the despair of Zelda when Link takes the whole screen. His sword is as big as him. Zelda dare not look at him at that time. She is partly curling up while Link is standing in training posture, open. Plus, we see at the end of the scene that they are very far from each other, even more than we could believe at the beginning, thanks to the perspective. Getting closer is no easy task, Link becoming stronger and stronger, an idea taken up during a discussion with Urbosa in a cutscene from Hyrule Warriors, and Zelda feeling almost weaker and weaker, her research hardly succeeding. Zelda's situation is indeed extremely difficult to live with. While she is exhausted trying to find the secret of the relics and the guardians, so she is not idle at all, failure is never off her lips, and her father himself has very harsh words for her, even more so in the French translation where he explains to Zelda, in front of Link, that the inhabitants of the castle, the court, call her a Fade Princess. In the English translation, it's more global. She is said to be the heiress of a throne of emptiness, a throne of nothing, so this may include the king himself. Zelda may not be the only one targeted. He has no interest in his daughter's work on the relics, not that they are useless, according to him, but Zelda should only focus on unlocking her power. This is very humiliating for Zelda, who is called a Fade Princess in front of Link, whom she now holds in high esteem. Presumably very strong feelings are growing, we'll come back to the nature of their relationship later, but to whom she considers herself systematically inferior, and her work on the relics and guardians is the only thing that doesn't make her feel completely useless. She, who was radiant at the beginning of this scene, now sighs, anxious, worried. She hardly contains herself. The presence of the king is double-edged. It forces Link to stay during the conversation, so he has to hear what the king is saying to his own daughter. However, the posture that Link has to take in front of the king erases him a little from the scene. We see little of him from the moment when the gentleman makes his entrance. It must be admitted that it's not with this scene that the king is going to be appreciated. We can't give Link any reaction, but we can slightly erase his presence, as if he wasn't really listening. He won't have to give a report on this conversation anyway. Although his pose is similar to that of the ceremony, the first memory, here Link keeps his eyes open. This is a detail, but it may suggest that in the sole presence of Zelda, he abandons himself a little more, if we think of the shot on his very peaceful face when Zelda looks at him. While the music of this memory begins in a rather luminous way with the piano, with a rather pure sound here, characteristic of the high register of the instrument, the main theme of the game underlining the confidence of the princess, whose research seems to be finally successful, besides the pulse is rather erased. As her father arrives, that's a whole different story. Well, music. A small, very rhythmic motif, very binary, with dotted rhythms on the brass instruments and using parallel fourths, hints at his belonging to the royal family, as the symbol of the Triforce appears on the screen on the gentleman's bed. But after this entrance, the piano starts again, stating the theme of the Castle of Hyrule. A theme certainly classic in the franchise, but which always surprises me a little by its dark character, with notably the diminished fourth, perhaps to indicate that the castle in the games where it appears is in danger. The register of the piano changes, so the sound is different. We are in the low or the medium register, it is obviously darker. The monologue of Zelda's father is supported by a much more perceptible pulse than before, with a rather throbbing left hand in particular, and the diminished fourth, B-flat F-sharp, later we hear diminished third, D-flat B-natural, which brings an additional tension, doesn't sound well. The king sweeps away the research of his daughter because according to him, her place is not there. The same theme is repeated higher, and to this is added a small stepwise motif in the high register, accompanying Zelda's defense. She spends her days studying and her nights praying, "What more do you need, Grandpa?" Yes, I'm calling him Grandpa because he annoys me. A defense that becomes very personal and painful as she is forced to repeat that her power hasn't been triggered yet and that she therefore feels more useful by studying, thus implying, "I am useless." But Old Man here sweeps away Zelda's arguments and it's time for the parallel octaves. No means no. It is taken up again just after in the high register with a softer phrasing as if to show the situation from everyone's point of view. The king is decided, Zelda is hurt. Her father denies her the only thing that makes her feel useful, at the risk of repeating myself, "You old man." We finally hear one of the main themes, the same theme as during the ceremony with Link since he's in the same position and the princess' uncertainties come up, while the king tries to persuade his daughter through a more personal attack, telling her what they think of her at court. This is so cruel. 4 chords conclude the score as the king leaves. They manage to convey the strange ending of this dialogue. The king's last words are almost encouraging, prove them all wrong, but he ends harshly, "Do you understand?" And here the chord is more tense, the impetus is wider, to which Zelda responds submissively, "Yes, I understand," or "Yes, father," in French. The last word is said in a sigh, barely audible in French.
C'est compris?
Oui.
We end on the tonic, low G, that is not hard but sounds definitive. Zelda cannot count on her father's support. He has turned the initial situation around and swept away his own daughter's work. He has also appropriated the music. In addition to a virtuoso support of the conversation between father and daughter, the change in the music as the prince's father arrives may reflect Ganon's increasing power. If Old Man here insists so much that Zelda meditates, this is because, according to him, the power of his daughter is the only real way to defeat the calamity. The way the music becomes dark and insidious, especially when the two registers overlap the two extremes of the piano, when the king arrives, in addition to expressing the tension between the two characters, also evokes Ganon without almost naming him. Zelda and her father each name him once, but his presence is not explored any further. This is an extremely hard moment for the princess, whereas the beginning of the cutscene was very encouraging, and Zelda seemed happy with her success with the Guardians, almost forgetting their presence dedicated to countering Ganon. In the French translation, she says, "How exhilarating," when mentioning her success with the relics. Although her research is a sort of compensation, since her power doesn't seem to trigger, and despite the time and energy she puts into it, falling asleep on her research, she seems to enjoy it, studying the world at length, knowing Hyrule's flora and fauna like the back of her hand, or her Sheikah slate. When she recalls them, the atmosphere of these memories is often calm in a very peaceful setting. Her father and the threat of Ganon brings her back to her feelings of inferiority. It's true that Hyrule's theme is inherently rather dark, yet it can be treated with more hopefulness, as in the DLC's last cutscene with the addition of a grace note, a counterpoint on the string instruments, the use of the flute in the high register, and a sunny opening that goes all the way to Disney-like fireworks. Not in this cutscene, obviously. When the king isn't there, which is most common in the cutscenes, Link has a few reactions in addition to his gaze. He always turns to Zelda when she speaks to him, as when he's practicing with a sword in front of her, always kneels down to her level, looks at the flowers she seems to enjoy, and even seems to be about to put his hand forward in a gesture of comfort, albeit very discreet. And most of all, there's the fountain cutscene, in which he forgets for a moment about his role as a protector for a more intimate one. While Zelda is praying in front of the fountain in order to awaken her power, Link has his back turned to her, who's in front of the water, his sword in full view to protect the princess. Zelda is without any protection when she's praying, and I doubt that some bokoblin would leave her in peace just because she's praying. He is in his usual knightly posture, in addition to the unfailing respect he shows. Zelda, tormented, evokes those voices that the women in her family heard and that she, alas, does not hear. At this point, Link turns his head, is involved in a way, because his sword also speaks to him through Fi. He knows what it is, what Zelda's talking about. And when Zelda is at her worst, he turns around completely to look at her. It seems that she is speaking to him. She uses the tu form in French, tell me. So it is either her mother or Link that she is talking to, but was she using tu with her mother? She uses vous with her father. He completely abandons his initial position. He is no longer a protector, or not that officially. It may not seem much. It's really not much, but for Link it's a very strong symbol. We have never seen him deviate from the mission he was given, even when Zelda used to reject him. On horseback, they are at the same level. The theme we hear is actually used in the game when we move on horseback in daytime. Here it is very slow since the horses are walking and alternates between the two ears like a dialogue. Dialogue only suggested since Link would remain very quiet. And when they come back from the last spring on Zelda's 17th birthday, although Link is behind the princess, they are shown from the front, which softened the perspective. They are almost the same size, Zelda even being a little taller, yet her power has not awakened. She soon lowers her head in this shot, which could have been from Link's point of view if he was not on her right. It could have shown his empathy. The balance between the two characters, or at least between the two representations that Zelda has of them, is very fragile. Although she regains some confidence, she still finds herself isolated. She is alone, praying in front of the fountain, when she comes forward to look at the view. It's logical, only she can trigger her power. Still feeling illegitimate, she can't confide in herself, can't abandon herself completely, and she seems convinced that the power will be triggered by her only. In the last cutscenes, however, we see how far we have come. Zelda doesn't hesitate to cry in Link's arms, to seek his comfort, which she only finds in Urbosa and to a lesser extent in Daruk, who has protective words for her, but it's related to his function. She trusts him completely. She has revealed all of her fears and the guilt that now consumes her to the one who, at the beginning, made her feel even worse. She has laid her mind completely bare. But most of all, they finally look at each other. Link will really look at Zelda until the end. And Zelda has been able to release her power. She has protected Link. They are now on the same level, responding to the scene where Link saved the princess from the Yigas. Zelda is very determined when she entrusts Link to the two men, as underlined by the very rhythmic and assured music. The same at the beginning of the scene when it is Link who clings to his duty, or more, it's very free, to protect her. She immediately goes to the tree to plant the sword in its rock. She is still covered with mud, far from the outfit she wore during the ceremony with the 5 champions, but it doesn't matter. She smiles, thinking of a future reunion with Link. 100 years after all, Zelda. Patience. I really like the way the relationship between the two heroes is presented. We can indeed imagine that it is about love. Both characters sacrifice themselves to save the other. However, in the case of Link, there is a presupposition. He is Zelda's appointed knight. It is his duty to protect her. The fact that he puts Zelda's life above his own is related to his function. We can assume that every knight puts the life of others before his own. And Urbosa reminds him of this. It's your duty after all, she says in the French translation. Thus, when he comes to Zelda's rescue by getting rid of the three Yigas, we can assume that he does so because he has to, which doesn't detract from his sacrifice, and nothing seems to show that he's blaming Zelda in the slightest, even before when she was angry with him. In her diary, she doesn't talk about anger, but rather confusion when describing Link's reaction. By comparison, we see Zelda clenching her fist when her father is harsh with her, something we never see Link do. But already this allows us to consider that this protection is not done out of love or anything but duty. In one song, Cass mentions that it is Zelda's love that unlocks her powers, but the word is never uttered by the protagonist of this relationship. At most, Link can answer in French, "my fiancé," when asked who he's cooking for when he travels, but this is really awkward and the possibilities for dialogue in French are quite strange given the way Link is portrayed in the cutscenes. In English, he only says someone special, still. There are no gestures that suggest anything. The only thing there is Link's function, as well as a mutual respect, which is building up, at least for Zelda, but seems to be already there for Link. It may be an extremely strong friendship, love, that's not sure. The absence of intimate gestures, although they are very strong and symbolic, such as Zelda crying in Link's arms, Zelda who is moreover in a situation of failure and supposed inferiority, she seeks his comfort from now on, whereas she was running away from him. This leaves the interpretation open as it shows the reserve of the two characters. In addition, these characters being themselves a kind of archetype of symbol, one can understand that their relationship is also symbolic. I mean suggested by actions that are symbolic, unlocking a power, or by symbolic elements like the two statues under the rock in the memory. The logo is very well chosen. Each character has their symbol, the Z for Zelda, the sword for Link, who doesn't speak but fights. There's a reminder of Link's defeat and sleep thanks to the sword visibly rusty and damaged by the fight against Ganon, and it mixes with the Z reminding that it is Zelda who planted the sword in its pedestal so that it regains its purity. The two characters are linked, their symbols too, illustrating their mutual protection. Finally, the two elements are about the same size, when Zelda feels inferior to Link in most of the cutscenes and in her diary. It is more explicit in the case of Mipha, since her feelings are mentioned by Sidon and his father, with as a proof of her love the Zora armor she made and the tradition associated with it. She herself doesn't say anything to Link, however the cutscene when they are both on the trunk of Varuta is very meaningful. It is a very intimate scene. The two characters are alone, far from everything, as Mipha is using her mastery of the divine beast to take them further away from the world, while they are sitting on the trunk of the animal. Mipha is also close to her creature. She has words for her after Link's victory in Varuta, and it is even said on the large stones telling the story of the Zora domain that she considers her a friend. Moreover, healing Link means touching him. It's also something that Zelda cannot do. Mipha's power is certainly not spectacular, unlike the other champion's abilities, but it's important and allows for a regular proximity with the swordsman, and most of all it is inherently useful to him. During the game, when the power is used, we hear Mipha say, "I'll protect you," in the French version.
Je te protégerai.
In French, she also switches from vous to tu. Pointing to the four other champions, she shows her preference, her loyalty to Link, whom she will save whatever the circumstances.
À chaque fois, quelles que soient vos blessures, je serai là. Je serai là pour te protéger.
She remains evasive in appearance. At most, she evokes this wish to find a certain symmetry in their relationship, a little change as Hylians grow up quickly, way more quickly than Zora's. When she tries to help Zelda trigger the sealing power, she is interrupted by the awakening of Calamity Ganon. One can suppose that she would not have confessed her feelings but found a way to lead Zelda to concentrate on those. Her feelings are not specified, but they are easily implied, since at this moment she stands in front of the setting sun, thus bathed in a very warm, almost red light. Mipha is undoubtedly the shyest of all the characters, but she can be read like an open book. Her feelings for Link shine through. The cutscenes all show a Link entirely focused on his missions, from protecting Zelda to fighting Ganon. A very serious Link, except when he's offered a hot-footed frog. No, Zelda, no. At the risk of repeating myself, you can't eat a raw frog. Link is very much into food, including a scene of debauchery in front of plates of food in Hyrule Warriors, but not that much. Link is indeed a hero, but a strange hero. After all these memories, we don't know anything more about the knight, but it is indeed as a hero that he is presented to us. In the game, it's a different matter. Our young knight would even be a bit ridiculous. Deprived of stamina, he sticks his tongue out, but encourages himself when the gorge is full again. After eating a dish, he gives himself a good pat on the stomach, probably helps with digestion. When he runs or climbs, we see drops of sweat around him in a very drawn way. In battle, his sound design is not as strange as in Skyward Sword, where he spends his time shouting very loudly, and I'll be honest, I find it a bit ridiculous. Link in Breath of the Wild is supposed to be an elegant fighter, you can see it in a cutscene. The sound design doesn't really convey this elegance, but it could have been worse. Climate changes don't spare him, and we see him shivering or catching fire, but this has a necessary informative function, since the temperature can drop in a few steps, and seeing and hearing Link shivering is more efficient than looking at the thermometer. The music also changes, but there can be a small latency. Open a chest with bare feet or hands and you'll see. That's not very smart, Link. The latter is a bit of a daredevil. Zelda did tell him, as brave as you are, that does not make you immortal, which is quite funny considering how the game works. We'll see that too. We see a lot of things in my videos. Link even gets to go on an incredible mission in stealth mode to watch over a fearful little Korok with a steady step, an intense moment. Furthermore, the French translation is rather humorous. Some characters have names that are conducive to puns. In French, Cass is called Asarim. Ah, that rhymes, for the accordionist singer. Do re fa, like the musical notes, since Mipha's name corresponds to the main interval of her musical theme. The Zora priest is called Clavier, which means keyboard. And the food and small animals' specific powers have sometimes humorous consonances like gla-gla, pic-pic, robusto. In English, it's sometimes funny, but in a more discreet way, like rushroom for mushroom. In addition to these animated elements, there's a good helping of humor in the game through the music, as rich as the world to explore. Indeed, what makes Breath of the Wild such a standout game on the console, and much more generally an iconic open world, is the combination of its rich gameplay and world design. Everything draws us in, and everything can be used. Nothing needs to be said for it to be understandable. Not everything is silent, but it's a safe bet that you could discover many shrines without being told. A lone tree on top of a mountain, a waterfall up a stream. As for the main quests, we are almost told too much. From an artistic point of view, and especially musical, there is a great richness of points of view, which is partly related to the richness of the gameplay. There is indeed a lot to do in Breath of the Wild. In addition to exploring the 5 major dungeons, the 4 Beasts and Hyrule Castle, not to mention the last dungeon from the final trial in the Champion's Ballad DLC, involving puzzles and combat, there are 120 shrines, quests, minigames, and 900 Korok seeds to collect. Yes, 900. The inventory is also full, its weapons galore, but mostly there is what's useless. Indeed, the world of Breath of the Wild is largely explored by air, thanks to the sturdy paraglide that Old Man gives us at the end of the game's prelude. This means of transport often allows us to discover the world gently, thanks to the winds of Hyrule, but at height. Under our feet, it's empty. We could feel that something would then be lacking, but this is not the case. Being at high altitude gives us a global vision of the map, but the world design of this opus is such that our eye is always drawn to several things at the same time at very different scales. A volcano, a castle surrounded by corruption, well, that one's obvious, a massive bird in the sky, or an elephant in a lake, a shrine overhanging a stable, strange formations in a lightning-struck plateau, a column higher than the others on top of which we'd like to know what there is to find, metal blocks arranged like a sculpture, peacefully sleeping cyclops, and a camp of bokoblins ready to be slain. That's a lot. Every step there is something to see, and especially something to do. All kinds of interactions are possible. You can chop or bomb a tree, lift a slab of stone that would be way too heavy for Link's arms, cross a river just by swimming, in a raft or with the help of Cryonis. Possibilities are almost infinite, and in particular you can interact with almost everything. Really. To such an abundance of gameplay possibilities will respond a very rich soundtrack. Indeed, it has elements of exploration with multiple functions, immersive and informative. It also has rather reactive and humorous fanfares and more constructed, elaborate pieces with dramatic and narrative function. Of course, there are magical orchestral moments. Of course, there are epic dungeon and boss musics, just as we love them. There is also this vast and complete world mixing the technology of the Guardians and the ancient forms, which the music conveys wonderfully. And there's this piano that sometimes, often, seems to comment on what Link, or rather the player through Link's model, is experiencing through musical elements that sounds straight out of a silent movie. It's a good thing because Link is not the most talkative. While the exploration is gently supported by a music that is not very intrusive but nevertheless very precise in its choices, we'll come back to that, the slightest discovery, from Hyrule's herbs to a chest containing an ice sword, the slightest cooking session, everything is punctuated by little fanfares, very detailed. You have a fanfare to find a new object, another one if the object is interesting. If you cook a very good meal, you have a little extra motive. While if you fail and cook dubious food, it won't end the same way. Humor is present in a very discreet way. When a merchant repairs something, for instance, the little sound element is very rhythmic. Everything works in pairs, then it changes slightly, and just before the last element there is a short silence, as if a regret had taken hold of whoever was making the item, and they felt it needed some more polishing. It is more obvious for the fanfares of the dying store played on the piano only and in accelerando, or the whistling of a pressure cooker when your dish is ready. And then there's the arrival of mysterious old man in a paraglide. The scene itself is comical enough, but it's even more so when you hear that D major chord sung by an imaginary choir. The only thing that would be missing is a ray of celestial light, interrupted by a little rhythmic motif on the piano as old man's feet touch the ground. It's knocking your socks off, Link, right? It's even more comical when you learn that he's the king of Hyrule. You weren't so nice when you told your daughter that the court thought she was a fake princess. Your bed looks very fluffy, but I'm watching you. And don't go all I have to act like a king and not a father in your diary. Finally, this treatment of the piano can extend to the point that the music develops in short sketches, like in the quest Watch Out for the Flower, where Link has to navigate through a maze of flowers without trampling one of them or else suffer the wrath of the NPC who planted it. There's lyricism too, with the small fanfare from the Recovered Memories, in which the piano arpeggios develop to conclude on a B-flat that snaps like the memory that appears in Link's mind. Beyond this short musical gesture, there are the exploration-related musics, which I found very successful because they show a lot of finesse in the way they combine humor with the seriousness of Link's mission. Indeed, some moments are humorous in a very fine way, like the musics when you travel on horseback, since they transcribe the associated mechanics. When you capture a wild horse, it takes some time to tame it. There's already a lot of things happening to them in a few minutes. Sometimes the horse refuses to move in the right direction. The music therefore presents a motif that is not always repeated identically, neither in the notes nor the rhythm, because it's still the horse who decides. To emphasize what changes, you need something unchanging. That's the regular pulse given by the quarter notes on the piano. As the bond between the horse and Link grows, the problem occurs less and less. That's when a more lyrical theme is heard on the strings. The pulse is no longer a constraint, it becomes a support. The horse no longer restrains us, it takes us where we want. When it's nighttime, it's the main theme of the franchise, the overworld theme, but even that is not so quiet, as if the horse could snap at any moment. The first note, the low C sharp, starts with a rather determined bow stroke, very contrasting with the rest of the theme. All the musics of the villagers have their night equivalent with a different instrumentation, a different key sometimes, and especially progressively slows down in the image of the sleepiness which takes hold of the place. The activity gets quieter. The music of the Lost Woods and the Labyrinth is also well chosen, especially in the case of the woods, since their mysterious aspect is not translated by the usual whole tone scales. Mystery means whole tone scales, right, Ori? Although they are common in the Zelda franchise, like the teardrop effect on the Sheikah Slate, or more globally the recurrence of whole tone intervals in some melodies. The ambience is suggested by a rather rhythmic element, without much melodic development, since we focus on a G minor arpeggio. G minor it is, then. We can still hear the Koroks. There are 900 of them in the game. They can appear at a given moment, like a ghost, haunting our most terrible nightmares. Let's note the very nice transition from the Lost Woods to the Korok Forest. We remain in the same key. The transition is particularly pleasant to the ear. These exploration musics have partly an informative function. The open world of Breath of the Wild is rich by its atmospheres, its climates, and its enemies. You can be shivering with cold at a given moment, and a few seconds later you're catching fire, for real, on the lethal slopes of Death Mountain. There are several visual elements, Link's reactions or a visual effect, and sound elements that help us spot these changes, including music. If it's too cold or too hot, you'll know it. If an enemy is here but you can't see him because he's behind you, trust me, this has happened more than once, you will still know because the music changes. Sometimes this informative aspect is lighter, subtler, rather descriptive. It is about accompanying an exploration that has its moments of softness and wonder at the nature in front of us, but during which our attention cannot dwindle. Each kind of landscape has its own music anyway, whether you're exploring ruins, the highlands, or walking along the waterside, but this is best translated by the music from the simplest context, field. This music uses a very strong specialization with a great management of the position of the different elements, their distance too from our ears. Leaving large pauses, breaths, between the different musical gestures, the piano sometimes becomes an imitator, and we enjoy hearing groups of notes like birdsong. Some notes played backwards come very gently to oppose the quietness of these pieces, a discreet warning that nothing is perhaps ever completely safe in Hyrule and its neighboring areas. If these musics don't have the narrative and dramatic power of the dungeon or boss musics, and this is normal, we can detect very light elements of narration like the male voices in Scorching Climate, as the work near Death Mountain in the mine is a group work. This duality between heroism and humor is also emphasized by the boss musics. If everything associated with Link's main quest, that is to say the beasts and Ganon, remains very first degree, by which I mean rather serious music, sometimes epic, but without any humor, the music for the non-Ganon related bosses is quite funny, as if anything not related to Ganon was small fry for Link. I loved my first meeting with the Molduga thanks to this music. For the stone Taluses, the fight starts with the sound of flints. It's amusing before a massive ascending scale surprises us as the creature literally emerges from the ground. The piano, omnipresent in the fanfares, is treated in a similar way, thus quite humorous, for the theme of the Guardian Scouts that Link meets in the temple with different variants. It illustrates really well their rather amusing movements without forgetting the technology they're made of, thanks to the sound effects in the music. Proper bips and boops. The game is also clear on what's important or not. The music of the Flight Range minigame, to prove our ability to fly to Vamedo, uses the same theme as the one of the confrontation against the actual creature, but without the real symphonic orchestra. It's just a paid copy of the fight against the imposing mechanical bird, and a reference to musics on all the consoles. There's a music for everything anyway in the minigames, like the Quika and the Goron's Test of Will, or the two scientists. Pura from the Hateno Ancient Tech Lab, younger than expected, has an impish theme on the recorder. Robbie, in Akala, would be more of a windmill guy. And there's this game over. While Link dies in an unspectacular way, therefore realistically, failure has absolutely no consequence on the game since you come back to the last save, complete, therefore with the corresponding inventory. What has been gained in the meantime has disappeared, but what has been lost has therefore come back. Death didn't really happen, you rewind and try again. After all, it's just game over. Literally, the game is over. It's quite disturbing since the champions didn't have this possibility. They only had one life. All of them died, which Zelda mentions when she runs away with Link. This is the case in all the games except roguelikes, roguelites, one life mode. Death is only temporary, but the champions often mentioning their defeat against the Blight Ganons created by Ganon himself, and the superiority of Link, who manages to kill them, whereas is just a playable character who gets all the attempts he wants. It's a bit disturbing. For example, Oboza confides to Link that she didn't even have time to fight back against Thunderblight Ganon. She died as soon as the boss appeared, but she has no doubt that Link will triumph. Mipha's scene with Sidon is also touching from this point of view. She's visibly worried when she learns that Link is the 5th champion, and her words are full of meaning when she speaks to her little brother, Sidon. These are probably among the last moments she shares with him. She knows that death surely awaits her even though she is young. Although a future without Ganon is sometimes mentioned, it is in a very hypothetical way and looks often become serious. The two themes of Mipha and her brother answer each other, and the choice of instruments is obvious but effective. Flute and piccolo to show the age difference between the two with, as often happens for the scenes and places associated with Mipha, an instrumental element associated with childhood, like a Celesta or a Glockenspiel, or with the choice of the recorder sometimes instead of the flute. I'll detail it in a following part about the music from the 4 main dungeons, but the theme of childhood or lost youth is recurrent with Mipha in connection with Link. The music is then richer, more gripping too when Mipha shows her talent to her young brother by swimming back up the waterfall. In the last demonstration, a little cathartic, the rhythm gets carried away and accompanies their ascent. Mipha's theme, simple, simplistic even, is developed with large intervals. It's actually the same treatment as in the battle against Varuta, attempting a rhythm escape with a dotted rhythm and the quarter notes triplets afterwards before stopping suddenly. This moment allows her to reaffirm the fact that she's a champion. She is the youngest. One might think she is less talented, but she knows how to pilot her divine beast very well. Zelda mentions this in her research notes. And to forget the fear of facing Ganon, of whom she knows nothing. Agile and elegant, it almost seems as if Mipha is trying to impress Zelda, even though she is often discreet, even shy, and respectful. She calls her Your Highness in a memory in the French translation. Would you wish for a short moment to free herself from the inferior place she believes she takes up in Link's heart, in addition to freeing herself from her fear? Mipha does reveal in her diary the fear she feels when she learns that Link, now appointed Zelda's personal knight, will spend almost all his time with the princess. The presence of these four champions and the fact that they are clearly characterized and developed can thus change our connection to their death and to Link's. Death is presented in a very asymmetrical way. The first memory leaves no doubt about the champion's character and the emotion that connects them to Link or Zelda. And again, this is done through the character's looks, amplified by some of their gestures. The camera lingers on the face of each champion as Zelda is reciting her prayer with difficulty while she's blessing Link and his sword. Mipha's face is almost impassive, however she lowers her head at the end of the shot. In retrospect, we can understand that she's worried. Link is appointed Zelda's personal knight because she's in danger due to Ganon's rise in power. The calamity is therefore implied during the scene, as well as the fights against him. We can note that Mipha is the only non-speaking champion in this memory. She is the least talkative of the champions. What's connecting her to Link is the love she feels for him, so she can't really speak for now, because it's rather on Zelda that they're all focusing, except maybe for Revali. Revali's look is more direct and easily translates his distrust of Link, whom he does not call by his first name either, like Zelda in her diary. His head is slightly tilted, his wings crossed as if he was looking at the night from a distance. He is quite closed and distrustful. Revali is also one of the most talkative, and we notice that he takes up space. He spreads his wings to the point of making Mipha move back. Her reaction is certainly discreet but visible. Her eyes move, following the Rito's wing, and she shifts slightly. He is quite the assertive kind. Then his wing is like a closed fist on his hip. He does not like Link. We get it. For Daruk, it's not hard to understand either. His small round eyes open wide and his rubbing his chin betrays his dubious nature right now. This ceremony doesn't look right. Something's completely off. He seems rather sorry, scratching his head, arms flailing as if to apologize. This ceremony is his idea. Daruk's power is a very strong shield ability, and this is already apparent in his personality. He's not attacking anyone, he's not really accusing anyone, he doesn't name Zelda directly. But in this scene, his relationship with Link isn't even suggested. It will be done in the memory associated with the Goron, Daruk's medal. It's different for Urbosa. In this scene, the emotion that's predominant is obviously concern. She's anxious about seeing Zelda unhappy. She defends her, she explains how the princess feels about Link's presence. She never talks about Link even when she talks to him. She is entirely turned towards Zelda, whom she calls my little bird in English and Madame in the French translation, taking up the words of the princess mother and emphasizing the almost motherly relationship she now has with the young lady. Not that one. All the characters will be gathered in several other memories, one after Zelda has prayed at the Spring of Wisdom, and one at Hyrule Castle during a ceremony, then outside, studying the Sheikah Slate and taking a picture. Each champion is then featured in a memory that they share with Link and another, older memory, showing the scene when Zelda comes to ask them to be one of the champions alongside Link in order to fight Ganon. We see them interacting with Zelda rather than with Link, and the character of champion is emphasized as the memory doesn't necessarily highlight their specific power. Mipha's is not very spectacular, rather intimate, at least when she uses it on Link, but more generally their extraordinary abilities, as well as a more in-depth look at their personality or their connections, whether they're friends or family. I already mentioned Mipha earlier, so let's move on to Revali. I have rarely seen such an unbearable character. He stays for a long time higher than Link's position to be above him, because although he is imposing, he's not much taller than him. Extremely proud of his power, he talks a lot, he also expresses himself using superlatives. While he is most aggressive towards Link, to whom he gets closer, whom he points at with his feathers, around whom he circles as if Link were a kind of freak, to the point that Link takes a step back, he does not really look directly at him, not often. His eyes seem to be turned towards an imaginary audience. His power is spectacular, and Revali must think he deserves the public. Alas, later on, he is the one who will end up being Link's audience, the only spectator of a duel from which he did not come out alive. In the DLC's memory, it's even worse. He's interrupted by Zelda during his training while he has just failed using his ability. "Quick, the princess saw me in a weak position, I have to be rude and cut her off." He ends up flying higher and further, again making scornful remarks about Link. Impossible right until the end. In the last cutscene we see him handing the Sheikah Slate to Mipha with disdain, almost throwing it away, to the point that Mipha is surprised. Funny detail, at the end when the picture is taken, only Link looks at all the characters in turn, and only Revali looks at nobody. Mipha maybe? Not sure. It looks like he's trying another pose. Daruk also thinks quite highly of himself. In French he says the great Daruk, while the music, rather emphatic, focuses on the brass instruments. But not quite in the same way.
C'est qu'en tant que grand champion des Gorons, j'ai quand même une réputation à tenir, moi. Manquerait plus que le grand Daruk se laisse distancer par les autres prodiges.
It's rather related to his title, Great Goron Champion, again in the French translation. He wants to live up to it. He's much more human than Revali, and protective given his shield ability. He also talks a lot about his environment, his village, which he loves deeply and is loved back. He has his own statue on the Goron Memorial. It was added at the top after he sacrificed himself during the battle against Ganon. He wants to prevent Ganon not from killing him, but from harming his environment. The music, very emphatic at the beginning when he introduces himself, turns into a certain lyricism, a tenderness almost when he presents his environment with very laudatory words. In English they used a food metaphor, Gorons actually eat rocks. In the French translation they also used partly that metaphor, but added an alliteration to emphasize the ruggedness of the Goron landscape.
J'aime contempler ces arêtes et ces rochers rugueux. Rien que de les voir, ça me met l'eau à la bouche.
His power is the shield, which is highlighted in the memory. It's still visible despite the smoke, whereas Link disappears completely, while the mountain seems to wake up because of Ganon. His small, round eyes are always wide open without any malice. He always looks directly at Link or at this nature he loves so much. Acknowledging Link's talent, he sings Link's praises in his diary. He congratulates him on his status as Zelda's appointed knight. He is also altruistic, unlike Revali, since his power can protect others as he does with Link right after. If he changes the subject during a conversation, it's because something feels wrong, a danger seems to be lurking, and in the presence of Zelda, he's worried that she's not protected enough by the soldiers. the Gorons would do a better job. Finally, in Urbosa's memory, Link is again rather a spectator and she's defending the sleeping princess. She witnesses the obstacles in their relationship and wants to help them get closer. She is protective, even maternal. The princess is asleep against Urbosa. Yet she also reveals her mischievous side, the ease she has using her power, triggering lightning with a snap of a finger.
Urbosa! What was that? Did you feel that? Wait, what? How did you... What are you doing here? What's so funny?
The English and French translations are quite different because if Urbosa calls Zelda my little bird in English, in the French version it is a seemingly respectful madame. But the story remains the same. It comes from a discussion with the late queen, Zelda's mother. Urbosa is always willing to comfort the princess, even after she has prayed at the Spring of Wisdom. The English translation, however, is a bit more sharp. Feeling sorry for yourself won't be of any help, which is also made possible by the phrasing. Urbosa's French voice actor, Laetitia Lefebvre, is more in empathy, while the English version, where Urbosa is voiced by Elizabeth Maxwell, puts a bit more distance, the phrasing being a bit more drawling and with a kind of malice.
You've done all you could. Feeling sorry for yourself won't be of any help. After all, it's not like your last shot was up there on Mount Lanayru. Anything could finally spark the power to seal Ganon away. We just have to keep looking for that thing.
Allons, madame. Vous avez fait de votre mieux. On n'y peut rien si ça n'a pas fonctionné. Après tout, la méditation n'est peut-être pas le seul moyen d'éveiller le pouvoir du sceau. Il est tout à fait possible qu'il finisse par se manifester d'une autre manière.
In any case, there is a great coherence between the translation and the voice's tone and phrasing. Whereas Revali tends to get higher in order to look down on the others, which is actually difficult for him because he's not that tall despite his long wings, Urbosa almost bends over to be at Mipha's level when they both look at the Sheikah slate.
Somehow it can create true-to-life images.
Wow. I would love to see it.
Of course, the music of each dungeon will in turn reinforce what the cutscenes have already underlined about the four champions. Obviously, taking thematic and instrumental elements from the champions and their respective clans, their choice as well as their treatment is very relevant, highlighting not only the character of each of the champions, but also their place in their clan. Each dungeon is structured in the same way. Each divine beast being manipulated by Ganon, its usual behavior is amplified, making it more dangerous for the inhabitants of the nearby village or clan. It can actually kill some of them. Getting closer to it is no easy task. The creature systematically attacks whoever comes near it. Only a champion can do it, but 4 champions are dead. It is therefore up to the last living champion, Link, with the help of an important member of the clan, someone often close to the dead champion, to confront the beast in a battle. When the creature is tamed, Link can then enter the dungeon, where he is guided by the voice of the champion's spirit in the place where they perished.
Well now, I've seen that face before. I had a feeling you would show up eventually, but making me wait 100 years is a bit indulgent. You're here to wrest control of Meadow away from Ganon, correct?
The exploration begins, during which we must solve puzzles by moving the beast to reach terminals and activate them before the fight against a Blight Ganon. Systematically, the musical introduction of the dungeons is very dark. The piano chords of Bamedo and Vanaboris in particular are quite tense and intense. It takes up the musical element we hear the first time we encounter the Divine Beast, but in the dungeon there's each time an additional, slightly synthetic element recalling their non-human character. Then the music uses elements specific to the champion or their clan, but evolves discreetly with each activated terminal. Most of the time, an instrument is added when one terminal is unlocked. The exploration ends with an acceleration in the home stretch after the last terminal has been activated. The nose is tightening because the beast's Blight Ganon is about to attack us. So there are 4 Blight Ganons, each one connected to the champion's element: water, wind, lightning, or fire. They all share the same theme, but each one is colored by the instrumentation of the corresponding champion. As I said before, the choices for these themes reveal the character of the champion and their place in the clan to which they belong. A very interesting example is Revali's dungeon. He is certainly one of the most unbearable characters in the game because of his self-importance, so seeing Link enter the Divine Beast is a narcissistic injury for him. Link has succeeded where he, Revali, previously failed. It's also a very impressive dungeon because we are high in the air and the slightest movement can be synonymous with a vertiginous fall. You could tell me, and you would be right, that this is the case for each Divine Beast, but this one is really the highest and I felt a strange vertigo, although I am not prone to it in real life. One step too many and I could fall from very high. The instrumentation is therefore very aerial, with the strings dominating in a perpetual motion that sometimes escapes into the high register, like short moments of tension. They take up an element specific to the theme of Rito Village, a slow tremolo on a half tone that evolves quietly to end on a descending arpeggio, elegantly introducing another motif. In the music of the Rito Village, this motif systematically evokes a quiet flight, or even a soaring bird, whereas in the creature the impression is quite different, more lyrical. In the Divine Beast, the half-tone doesn't evolve, but sometimes there's a short motif that swiftly escapes, a scale or something shorter. Revali cannot fly anymore. He may try, but he's just a ghost now. For Windblight Ganon, it's the accordion that gives some color to the theme. The accordion is the instrument of Cass, the singer, the storyteller. It's also Revali's instrument, not one of the instruments from the Rito Village. We hear the mandolin and the clarinet as solo instruments in the village. But Revali is lonely. It's even the title of the DLC's memory, Lonely Warrior Revali. We also saw that in his first cutscene, Revali's Flap, he will rather look at an imaginary audience rather than look at Link. In comparison, Daruk looks at the mountain when he's not looking at Link. He loves his village, he loves this world to which he belongs. Reveille seems to want fame and achieve posterity, and Cass, through his songs, could give that to him. That may be the reason why Reveille's music features the accordion rather than an instrument from the Rito village. It's also a good choice of orchestration because the accordion blends particularly well with the strings. It is with great difficulty that he admits Link's luck, not his success nor his talent where he once lost. He will appear in Cass's songs, but maybe as a champion among others, not as Champion Reveille. And even if he's mentioned by Cass, who killed the Calamity? Not him. There's a particular staging for Daruk's dungeon. Starting in the dark, it gradually lights up during the introduction before Daruk turns it on completely, like the music that would become almost joyful despite the deep, low notes of the piano, immediately brought out by the sitar and percussion as well as the flute for the theme. From iteration to iteration, the texture of the sound is enriched with always an emphasis on depth, intensity, often low sounds that come to reinforce and sublimate the bass of this very beautiful score. It's intense but strangely bright thanks to the work on the instrumentation, as the dark and lower elements are always discreetly counterbalanced by other sounds. He is a mischievous character, cheerful, comical too, but with whom we feel safe. His power is a powerful shield, so he's logically shown as attentive to the warning signs of Ganon's attack in his first memory. The percussion have a character that would become almost intoxicating at the very end after the last terminal has been activated, contrasting with the tension that is usually felt at this point in other dungeons. For, deep down, is Daruk afraid of Ganon? He worries about his increasing power and the consequences on his beloved mountain, but does his face ever betray the fear of facing the Calamity? He would rather defy him, he'd rather die than leave this mountain to Ganon. Looking at all the memories, we rather keep in mind the good mood of the champion, who closes all of the memories with a last joke when Mipha asks for a group picture. Also, the instrumentation features instruments reminiscent of a gamelan, a musical ensemble from the Javanese, Sundanese and Balinese people. The notion of ensemble is very important for the Gorons. They work together in the mine, and as such we hear male voices even in the music of those lava zones as a reference to the mine. Daruk was very popular in the village, he even has his face on the Goron monument. The choice of instruments can reveal the importance of the group for the Goron people, but it doesn't use the brass instruments as they're used as a comic relief in the Goron zone, too much to be really appropriate for both this beautiful dungeon and the champion's gruesome fate. They are just used as a rare punctuation in the dungeon. Urbosa's theme is slow and elegant, quite solemn as it uses long notes, quarter and dotted quarter notes in a slow tempo. But there's a reason. Urbosa is the head of the Gerudo clan. We only see her once in this posture in the first scene of the EX mission in the DLC. Otherwise, she talks to the princess or writes about the princess. Urbosa doesn't talk about herself, she doesn't reveal much, even in her diary. She talks about Zelda's mother and mostly about the princess herself. Zelda over here, Zelda over there. She loves her like her own daughter. But what else do we know about Urbosa besides her ties to the royal family? We know she was a fighter, an elegant one, virtuoso. She even looks like she's dancing more than fighting. Memories show many different images of her. The leader, the friend, the protector, the confidante, the fighter. If we know so little about her, it is because she is altruistic like her statues as clan leader. She wants to protect her clan, her city, and in particular she wants to clear the reputation of the Gerudos, who we learn in Urbosa's journal are associated with Ganon. Ganondorf is indeed a Gerudo sorcerer raised by two twin sisters, powerful witches from the Gerudo clan. Her thematic elements are therefore erased in the dungeon in favor of the ornamented motif of the Gerudo city and its almost overdotted rhythms. The dulcimer and the eru, her instrument, are kept. It's even heard in the memory when Zelda returns from the Spring of Wisdom. Urbosa's theme is played on the eru when she speaks, but its tone also accompanies Zelda's sadness really well.
You've done all you could. Feeling sorry for yourself won't be of any help. After all, it's not like your last shot was up there on Mount Lanayru. Anything could finally spark the power to seal Ganon away. We just have to keep looking for that thing.
That's kind of you. Thank you.
If I may.
The young Riju, who's now head of the Gerudo clan, shares Urbosa's theme, Higher, with a different instrument, the flute, whose tones reminiscent of her age. Mipha, finally, is worshipped by her fellow Zoras. Following her death, a statue is placed in the center of the Zora domain, and many people blame Link when they see him, considering him responsible for Mipha's death. The Zoras age very slowly, and almost all of them seem to have known Link even though he has slept for 100 years. The Zora domain has its thematic material on a rather dominant instrument, the harp, often in the low register, and I really like harp in the low register. We do not care. Very personal opinion, but to me the theme of the Zora domain, although very beautiful, is particularly adapted to a place. It does not conjure any emotion to me, contrary to the coupled themes of Mipha and Sidon. I hear the elegance and the balance of a place with impressive and refined architecture, but it is very distant, there is no warmth. This is not that surprising. Can we indeed find a common character trait among the Zoras? The Gerudos sometimes have a kind of nonchalance, amplified by the sweltering heat of the desert, yet they are powerful warriors. The Gorons are rather welcoming and hardworking, but quite funny as they hurtle down the roads, all curled up into a ball. It's already more difficult for the Ritos. Their thematic material is thus rather related to their flight, inherent to their nature as birds of prey. As for the Zoras, I find them really neutral, but it is surely very subjective. The music of the first battle against the creature is based on the theme of Mipha and her brother. They have a similar theme that uses the musical notes of their first name. It's a descending half tone that gives it a rather plaintive character. Sometimes the two elements are mixed in the same theme. And it keeps a very classical, orchestral instrumentation with the oboe and the flute, and sometimes the piccolo, as soloists. In the dungeon, it's the Celesta that will be used. Apart from the Celesta, we can hear strange sounds, almost like noises. It is very haunting, actually, like that very faint organ that's added during the exploration, while the piano obsessively repeats an arpeggio based on an augmented fifth, thus playing with whole tones, as usual in the franchise. After that, in the Waterblight Ganon's theme, the oboe from the previous battle, when we fought against Varuta with the help of Sidon, is used again. Mipha is the youngest of the champions, and most of all, she seems to regret her youth with Link. As she's in love with the swordsman, she underlines how fast he grew up and calls him to come back to see her after Ganon's defeat, like when they were both children. Maybe things can go back to how they used to be when we were young. The whole Zora domain thus steps aside and stays behind Mipha, sacrificed, and the dungeon would represent this lost childhood, a youth that ended far too soon for Link, and a death that came far too quickly for Mipha. It really is a sacrifice. She often corrects herself in her dialogues, mentioning Link, then only the other champions, especially in the French translation. She's happy to be useful to him as her power was useful to him. It's a consolation for her to help him through and beyond her death. And to recall this lost youth, her last words are for her father, also aware that she was about to sacrifice herself, but she did it to help the man she loves. Ganon is certainly named, but he's not someone we really see. He's more of a corruption. His presence is suggested by overhead shots on the characters as if they were being observed. No character is big enough to justify such camera angles, and his increasing power is only revealed through a world that turns against its inhabitants. He is almost omnipresent in the characters' thoughts, his name is often mentioned, but is not always there in the cutscenes. After all, Breath of the Wild is mostly Zelda's story. In the first memory, although Link's being assigned as Zelda's appointed knight is due to Ganon, there is no threat, neither in the environment, there is only a calm breeze, nor in the dialogue of the other champions, focused on this strange scene between Zelda and Link. After that, Ganon's thematic elements are centered around a Holton scale, for example during the Blood Moon, or when Daruk is worried about the Montai's awakening.
That was a little strange.
The element is then colored by the instrument associated with the champion.
For decades. But if the mountain is shivering enough to send down a bunch of boulders that size, then never mind. Forget I said anything.
In the Blind Ganon's theme, of course, the link is made with the Calamity through very chromatic elements, at the beginning in the low register of the piano, and in particular this long ascent using a major second repeated for each note of an ascending chromatic scale. This is offset by dynamic scales played on the champion's instrument, which brightens up the orchestration a bit. Or even twirling scales played on the string instruments, very epic thanks to the choir too, which underlines the feat that Link is achieving. Ganon's actual boss theme mainly reuses the most massive elements from the Blight Ganons, slower, and in the last phase it's Zelda's musical material that is now highlighted. As I said, it is her story. There is a word I regularly use in my videos, if not always. Hyperbolic. Well, usually it's when I talk about Ori, because in Ori, especially the second game, there is everything, absolutely everything. Platforming in all directions, weapons, music to die for, excess is the word. This is of course not the only game, and it is obviously very common to find in one or several elements of the game, the worlds, the gameplay, the animation, this excessive, unrealistic, almost impossible or even completely illogical aspect, but it is part of the game. In The Pathless, the player character has a crazy, extremely dynamic, physics-defying jump that is several times her height. In the Kingdom Hearts franchise, it is Aqua who often does impossible acrobatics. She has endless pivots and most of all, she does a backward somersault to climb a step. Yep, she does a back somersault to move forward. It makes absolutely no sense, but she does it. In Assassin's Creed, the parkour in the later games is very fluid and particularly lively. Sometimes it's the color palettes, you have a seemingly realistic world, but the colors just add a little something, some more oomph. Or Bayonetta, like all of it. Link, on the contrary, is, especially at the beginning, very realistic in Breath of the Wild. He doesn't run very fast, swims quietly, hardly jumps. When he glides with his paraglide, it's in a very calm way. Aloy, for example, in Horizon Forbidden West, uses it in a more dynamic way, very unstable even. And his climbing never looks like parkour, his stamina is limited. He acquires armors or powers that can certainly give him more extravagant abilities, such as swimming back up waterfalls or creating air currents, but he can't do it all the time, and it's a rather slow pace that sets in when exploring the world, even on horseback, since said horse sometimes rebel against him. And yet, Link has this excess, an invisible excess, an excess that is expressed in this ability that the whole world is at his fingertips. The gameplay has no limits because Link can do anything. The world of Breath of the Wild is offered to him entirely, and he can conquer it, interact with it without limits. Running, swimming, climbing, slowly but surely, to the point that I tend to forget that not all games have a paraglide, for instance, and when I play a completely different game, I still want to play it like Breath of the Wild. By the way, what is the world of Hyrule like? It's huge, of course, and the game encourages us to explore every nook and cranny to find the 900 Korok seeds. Even after we've done all the shrines and quests, we've only flown over Hyrule and the other lands and barely started the adventure. It is overhung by the Death Mountain, but although its heat is lethal to us, the Gorons make it welcoming by their laid-back attitude, a form of tranquility, their desire even to live in this climate, and their pleasant character. We meet Gorons in all other areas as a proof of how easy it is for them to adapt. This volcanic area is treated with humor but also respect. The volcano is a danger only when Ganon controls it through Vah Rudania. Apart from these moments, it's a respected place, admired by its inhabitants. Daruk is proud of it. This is a far cry from the usual treatment of lava zones. Outside of this area, the color palettes are never extravagant. We are far from a post-apocalyptic world like Horizons, for example, always very vibrant in its color choices, or even several areas from God of War. However, this color palette is generally quite soft, almost a bit dull, yet this isn't a problem. Hyrule still tells a story. It's a kingdom that's more than 10,000 years old, that bears the traces of what it has been through, not so much by Ganon's corruption or even the destruction of what made its greatness even 100 years ago, but given how it sometimes looks fragmented, which will probably be more exploited in Tears of the Kingdom. The dwelling peaks were one mountain long ago. Often some of the hills seem to have been crushed by a giant who angrily pounded their fist into them, now frozen in their destruction. The world itself is fascinatingly realistic, and maybe that's what makes it hyperbolic. Seeing a double rainbow, or the way the water evaporates gently after the rain, cutting down trees, defeating an enemy in so many ways, climbing an almost impossible wall. As for the music, if it sometimes strays from the immersive, informative, or humorous commentary, it is rarely tragic. It can be spectacular, epic, but never too much. When the choir is summoned, it's not treated like in a Soulsborne where it's omnipresent, lyrical almost to the point of excess, but it's very beautiful, let's be honest, Lady Maria or the Godskin Apostles, I mean. The theme of the four Blight Ganons, imposing and without humor, is not without character, with the reminder of the champions through the instrumentation, and especially it's not without hope, despite the presence of Ganon through the more chromatic elements. But who cares if it's not that extreme? There's already so much. Moreover, if these musics underline Link's achievement, they do not celebrate Link himself. The overworld theme, Link's theme, is rarely heard and it's absent from the boss's themes. Again, Link is in the background. It's what he accomplishes that is highlighted rather than a character. He is a symbol of adventure, probably the purest one. Link, a hero? In fact, nothing more than a foil. The champions and Zelda's exchanges with the knight only reveal more about the champions and Zelda, not about Link. In the case of the princess, Link is an element of comparison that only accentuates her unease. For the champions, Link is an interaction revealing more about their character, already more than sketched in the first memory. Even Mipha, though in love with Link, doesn't really make it possible for us to learn more about the swordsman. Daruk mentions Link regularly in his training journal, but do we really learn something about Link or about someone else? Finally, he highlights the world. Seeing Link moving, acting in this vast world means learning more about it, its realism and the prowess behind it. In the end, Link is both a hero and an anti-hero. Link is almost nothing and everything at the same time. But after all, Link is a knight, and a knight must protect to the point of putting his own life at risk, just as he steps aside, humble, and takes a back seat, letting the other characters reveal themselves to us and letting the player live, feel the adventure as they wish. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It took me a lot of time to do and I couldn't say everything, but I managed to have a decent look at the game's art. At least I think. I know it's not perfect. Next month I do a video on either Death's Door or Journey. I don't think I'll be able to edit it before February though. We'll see. Okay, thanks again and goodbye.